Hi, everyone. Welcome to topic 7.5. And today we are going to be looking at just a couple of the theories of development. So, what are some of the things that we will learn? Well, remember that industrialization has facilitated improvements in the standard of living, but it's contributed to geographically uneven development. And there are several different theories that we can look at to try to help explain these spatial variations. Today, we're going to look at Rostow's stages of economic growth. It's also known as the modernization theory. And we'll also be looking at Wallerstein's world systems theory, which is also called the core periphery theory. So let's look at some examples. Rostow's stages of growth. We look at growth over time and look at development over time. And so Rostow, we have 5 stages. And from stage 1, the traditional, up to stage 5, mass consumption. And almost all countries want to grow economically. It's beneficial for their citizens, and it also promotes better living standards and conditions. Walter Rostow, he assumes that all countries are capable of modernizing, capable of developing and rising out of poverty. He bases these assumptions by looking at those countries that had already industrialized. Primarily, he's looking at Britain, Western Europe, and the US. He thinks that for less developed countries to develop, that they have to follow specific stages of economic growth. So let's look at some of these stages. In your traditional society, this is typically your primary sector. Most people are engaged in agriculture, they're subsistence farmers, and you won't have a lot of economic growth because you don't have a lot of modern technologies. But at some point, you will have a demand for raw materials, and these demand for raw materials will encourage change. And so agriculture will become more productive. Remember that super cool new seed drill that they were using back in the Industrial Revolution? Well, they're going to be using it again. And commercial agriculture and cash crops will now be grown for export. And so with that money that they're getting for export, they can invest in things that they will need to increase their trade and to manufacture and expand production. Um, Innovations in technology will end up spreading, and boom, you've got from the farm to industry. We've got the takeoff. And technological innovations, industrialization begins, and we start to see urbanization increasing. Your secondary sector will expand as well. Your primary sector is going to decrease, right? Not as many farmers. Those farmers are moving into the cities for those manufacturing jobs. Just think about Great Britain's Industrial Revolution. And then we've got our drive to maturity. And so industries will expand, they'll grow, new ones will start to pop up pretty quickly. Manufacturing will go from investment driven, right, your capital goods, toward consumer durables, cars and appliances, because who doesn't need a washing machine and a dishwasher? And so we also start to see rapid development of transportation infrastructure. We'll invest in schools, universities, hospitals. And then we enter our age of mass consumption. And this is stage 5. This is where we are today. Your primary sector of the economy is just very small. And we start to see a consumer society of high value goods. It's those cars, right? Cars, appliances, those kind of high value goods. We also have disposable income now, and we can spend it on luxury items that you don't need, like ladies, that $50,000 white Nile alligator crocodile Birkin bag, or the PS5. Those are luxury goods that we don't really need, but maybe some people have the disposable income to purchase them. So that was Rostow's stages of economic growth. Remember, he thinks that every country, if you follow these stages, that you can modernize and you can develop. Wallerstein is the second theory that we'll talk about today, his world systems theory. And this is really based on the belief that the world is an economic system and all the countries are interdependent upon each other. Some countries will be exploited for the profits of other countries. We also call this the core periphery theory. And here you can see some countries are core, some are periphery, meaning the least developed. But then you notice that there are some that are kind of in between, the middle. Those are the semi-periphery. And so here we have the core. This is your developed, industrialized part of the world. The United States and Canada, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. These are our core countries. And then we have the periphery, the countries on the outskirts. They are underdeveloped. They typically are exporting raw materials to the rest of the world. So you tend to see them in Central Asia, Central America. We see Sub-Saharan Africa. And so these are going to be periphery countries. And then you've got your semi-periphery countries, your industrializing, mostly capitalist countries that are positioned between periphery and core. And they really have components of both core and periphery. They will manufacture and export a variety of goods. And a good way to remember these semi-periphery countries, they're newly industrializing. We can say the BRIC countries or BRICums, or if you're hungry, you might want to say McRibs. But what do these letters stand for? Brazil, Russia, India, China, Mexico, and then we throw in South Africa too. These are our semi-periphery countries that are industrialized. They will have components of the core and also the periphery. So this is our world system. This is the core periphery theory if we want to look at it on that total scale. If you want to take a brief case study and look at the periphery, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it's very rich in natural resources, diamonds, cobalt, copper, gold, even oil. It mines and exports these things in pretty large quantities. Cobalt, which you might never have even heard of, it's used in our lithium ion batteries that powers electric cars. Oh, and your laptops and your smartphones. But we mine for this, or they mine for this, and they will send it to China. And China is the DRC's largest trading partner for exports. China has companies that will process and manufacture the cobalt into batteries, and then it gets sent to Apple or Tesla, and it's put in the things that we use. So you might want to pause now and just think about, what is the GNI per capita in the DRC? If you pause and look at some of these questions I have up there, look it up. Compare the GDP of the DRC to the GDP of California. And based on those numbers, would you consider the DRC to be underdeveloped? So I can tell you it is. The GNI per capita is about $900 if you put it into US dollars. The GDP of the DRC is about 43 billion, and the GDP of California is about 3 trillion. So both of these models have limitations. They have strengths, but they have limitations too. And you can pause here and look at this if you'd like. But really, Rostow, some of his limitations is that he's explaining the development experience of the West, Europe, and America. He's not really considering that this might not apply to all countries. Wallerstein is only looking at the economic part, not really the social part. So if you look at a country like Niger and you see that the average literacy rate might be 30%, can your country really go along that continuum of development if you only have 30% of your population being literate? So these models, they have limitations, they have strengths, and we just have to remember that they are models. They are not exact. So let's do one practice question, and let's look at this question here. Which of the following best explains a political economic weakness or limitation of Rostow's stages of economic growth? And I will let you pause this and think about it, read the questions, and then come back. So hopefully you put B. So Rostow is making that inaccurate assumption that all countries want modernization and that they will all pass through the stages in order. Not all countries might want to be mass consumers like we are. So hopefully you put B. So what should we take away? We should know that Rostow and Wallerstein are just two theories that help explain why there are different spatial variations in development. Neither model is perfect. Each one has strengths and they have limitations. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I want to give a shout out to, hi everyone, welcome to topic 7.5. And my name is Miss Cosgrove, and we are going to continue our theories of development today. And we're going to learn a little bit about the dependency theory and commodity dependence. So what are some of the things that we're going to learn? Well, as we've talked about in the past, industrialization, past and present, has facilitated some improvements in the standard of living, but it's also contributed to geographically uneven development. And we know that there's different ways to explain these spatial variations in development. We've looked at Rostow's theory, we've looked at Wallerstein's core periphery theory, and today we'll look at the dependency theory and how countries that are commodity dependent are two other ways that we can explain these variations. So let's look at an example. The dependency theory is the idea that resources like bananas flow from poor and underdeveloped states, also called the periphery, to wealthy core states. So if you notice in this map here, I've also included semi-periphery. Semi-periphery is a component of Wallerstein, but today we're just going to look at dependency theory, and we'll just be focusing on core and periphery. So remember, the dependency theory is just that idea that resources are flowing from poor and underdeveloped states, the periphery, to wealthier states, the core. Wealthy states will get wealthier because they're taking from the poor. So they're not really taking. What they're actually doing is buying resources. So what does the periphery have that the core wants? Resources, natural resources like mining, like timber, like agricultural products, but also human resources. And how do we get human resources? Through low cost labor. The core will buy raw materials and will use the cheap labor from the periphery to make the products that we all want. And that includes the periphery. The periphery needs these goods. And with the money that they've gotten from selling resources, their natural resources, to the core, they buy goods at high prices from the core. And so you remain in this constant state of less developed. All the money that they're getting from selling the raw materials, they are spending on high value goods, whether it's phones or cars or appliances and TVs. Poor countries depend on the core to buy their resources, use their labor, and sell finished products back to them. Are there other factors that lead to that lack of development, though? So think of who actually owns the raw material. Is it a multinational corporation? Could it be a wealthy landowner? What happens if I am a wealthy landowner and they find oil on my property? I will be the one who's benefiting from that oil, me as a wealthy landowner. Will I be then investing back into my country? Probably not. So I'll be using those wealth and the money gained from the sale of my oil to benefit me, not necessarily reinvesting in my country. So let's look at commodity dependence. And some of these periphery countries are commodity dependent. So a country is considered export commodity dependent when more than 60% of its exports are made of commodities. What's a commodity? A raw material or an agricultural product that can be bought and sold. So you can think of coffee, oil, bananas, cobalt, sugar, cotton, diamonds, copper. You get the idea. Raw materials or agricultural products that are bought and sold. Commodity dependent developing countries are extremely vulnerable to price fluctuations. A slight drop in the price of oil can have a dramatic impact on a country's development. If the price of a barrel of oil goes from $200 a barrel and drops to $10 a barrel, you know that that country might really suffer economically. Environmental disasters and climate change can also impact agricultural commodity exports. So, how can environmental disasters affect crops? What if we have bananas? And so we know that throughout Central and South America, bananas are grown as plantation crops. These countries export the bananas to core countries. Fun fact, in the United States, we consume about 100 pounds of bananas per year, per person. Now, maybe you don't eat bananas, but someone is eating a lot of bananas. So they are sending us bananas. We are sending them money for those bananas. But what happens if a virus attacks those banana trees, a fungus or a virus, and kills the bananas? Then we see that those countries will lose their income. And this actually happened in the late 1960s, 70s, where a fungus affected the banana crops, and the fungus moved from Central America and down to South America. And they saw a loss of income from selling their bananas. So let's practice. I'm going to let you read this question, and you can put me on pause and try to answer those two prompts. So welcome back. And I hope that for part A, you would have thought about things like what I have up on the screen, explaining an environmental impact that a commodity-dependent developing country could face. So remember, commodity dependence, you are selling an agricultural product or another raw material. So let's explain an environmental impact that that commodity-dependent developing country could face. You could have put loss of habitat, destruction of the environment, soil degradation, water quality could be impacted. If you have mining waste leaching into the water supply or fertilizer and pesticides impacting the water supply, there could be changes to natural ecosystems or decreased crop variety due to monoculturing your crops. What about a political factor that could impact the economic stability of a commodity-dependent developing country. So maybe civil war, other types of conflict, governmental corruption, poor governmental policies, poor decision making, or even competing trade agreements. These are types of political factors that could impact the economic stability of a commodity-dependent developing country. So what should we take away from this? Just remember that there are many different theories that help explain spatial variations with uneven development. We've learned about Rostow and Wallerstein, and the dependency theory, and countries that are commodity dependent are just two more of the ways that we can try to help explain these variations. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you.